Thank you very much. Actually, you've got a double act today.
Oh, free. Enough of my list.
Only because Catherine knows what she's talking about. So, be useful for Catherine to join us. Good afternoon, everyone. Very nice to see you. Great to be here. Nice to come to an event I can cycle to as a Cambridge resident. We're going to talk today a little bit about the Wildlife Trusts and what we call the evidence emergency. But I'm going to start off just by telling you a little bit more about the Wildlife Trust. It's kind of relevant, really. It will tease out why it's particularly relevant in all this. And also because for international audiences, the Wildlife Trust isn't so well known. It's well known within the UK, but internationally it's not. So, and there's a couple of things at the very start that I just thought you'd find quite entertaining in all of this. So, we were started actually in 1912 when Charles Rothschild, the philanthropist, banker, got a group of friends together in the boardroom of the Natural History Museum about a month after the Titanic went down. I don't think there's a causal link between the two, but you know, that gives you an idea what they might have been wearing at the time. And they started what was called the idea that you buy up bits of land and protect them for nature. And there weren't many people doing it. And Charles was doing this. But the thing that I thought you'd find really entertaining is that in our original documents of incorporation, some of the charitable objects said that the objects for which the society is established and incorporated are to collect and collate information as to the areas of land in the United Kingdom, or elsewhere in the British Empire, which retain their primitive conditions and contain rare local species, either fauna and flora, liable to extinction owing to building, drainage, deforestation, or any other reason. And it goes on talking about buying up bits of land and so on. The thing that we thought was quite entertaining is that in our original charitable objects was just collecting information, basically for the sake of collecting information. It doesn't actually say that you need to make use of any of that information at all. It doesn't, you know, it's just, the implication is kind of there maybe. But I think it's worth thinking that I think a lot of British conservation, you know, comes out of the history of the Victorian Edwardian naturalists who loved collecting dead things and putting them in drawers and things like that, without necessarily a kind of purpose other than sort of intellectual curiosity behind it. And I wonder if there's something underpinning there in why perhaps as a sector we could have been better historically at how we go about using evidence to guide our work. But anyway, just a thought. So what do we look like today? Well, we're now 46 locally run wildlife trusts across the UK. So we're a federated charity. So each has their own chief executive chairs, but then we work together as a federation. We're also in the Isle of Man and Alderney. And so you'll know your individual local trusts if you live in the UK, and then we work together collectively. That again is, I think, an interesting structure from the point of view of this kind of discussion. Harriet was saying before now that the Woodland Trust is quite decentralised. Harriet, I guarantee you we're more decentralised than you. And sometimes it has its beauty and its challenges at times. But actually, on a good day, what that could lead to is 46 opportunities for innovation testing. But of course, you need a systematic approach to evidence to turn that into something useful. We now actually have more nature reserves than McDonald's has got restaurants in the UK, 1,000 more. And of course, it's a massive range of habitats and contexts that we operate in, pretty much every British habitat and also urban environments that we work in. And they range from really quite small ones to much larger ones. You put it together, so it's over 2,300 nature reserves, but you add it up, we're actually collectively the 7th largest landholder in the UK. We've now got 3,700 staff across the Wildlife Trust, 37,000 active volunteers. We have at the moment about 920,000 members, which put in perspective, good context right now to tell you that it's about 2 to 3 times the size of the largest political party in Britain, 10 times the number of people that voted for Liz Truss to become Prime Minister. And our collective turnover is around 220 million. And I say all that again, particularly to an international audience, because we're not known internationally or even across the British Empire anymore. And yet we are one of the largest conservation organisations globally in that kind of context. I should say we have updated our objects several times since 1912, including the phrase British. In 2021, we started work on a new collective strategy for the Wildlife Trusts about what's the collective impact we're trying to together, which we'd had versions of it before, but we hadn't sort of quite done one in the same way, which was really trying to say, how does all the work we're doing in the individual trusts add up to impact for nature? And I won't bore you with the details, but there's kind of three big goals. One, trying to get nature in recovery by 2030. One, people taking action for nature by 2030. And the third is around the role that nature can play in solving problems. In other words, nature-based solutions. But to enable all those things to happen, we're committed to 5 strategic transformations across the Wildlife Trust in building our collective capabilities and 5 enabling priorities, things we have to pay attention to make sure that happens. And these very much speak to evidence. They very much speak to the need for us to have a much more systematic approach to evidence and how we use it to guide our work. And so from that, then just 2-3 years ago, we recruited Catherine Nichter from the Committee on Climate Change to start building that work on climate and also our evidence work. And that's the point I had over.
Craig, I've been asked to be mildly controversial. So that's all right, but I'll do what you asked me to do first, which is talk a little bit about the evidence emergency. And a lot of this actually is very similar to what Harriet's just said. And I think a lot of the environmental NGOs actually are going through a very similar process, and we do all talk to each other as well, so it is quite similar. What we have done this year, and bearing in mind what Craig has just said, we're 46 individual charities plus the central team at the Royal Society of Wildlife Trust. So we're effectively trying to get 47 different organisations to all agree to do stuff together. This year, for the first time, we published a brand new evidence framework, which has the word test in it, which hopefully you'll be pleased about. And this is very much based around the test, do, learn framework. We've heard a bit about that this morning. I'll try and bring in a few themes from this morning as well. And a lot of this is about action learning. So I would say in our context, I was saying to Craig this morning, we're not particularly species-based, I would say, as an environmental NGO. We're very, very habitat and system-based at the Wildlife Trust. So we love all species equally. And a lot of what we do is about changing systems, changing landscapes. And when you're trying to apply conservation evidence to that kind of system-based problem, it does become quite difficult because you have so many questions that you're trying to answer. So the do, test, learn framework is about going around that cycle, very similar to what Glenn was saying this morning as well, about you've got to try stuff, see what works, see what doesn't work, monitor effectively, share experience. So that's the sort of framework that we're in as well. Another thing, just picking up from this morning, is about outcomes, logic chains, and monitoring. And alongside the strategy, we have started publishing a set of impact measures. So we now have, a very clear set of goals as to what we are trying to achieve as a federated set of charities, how are we measuring that impact. And one of the things I look after is our impact measures framework. And don't worry about the detail of this. But just to say, we are obviously very constrained in what we can measure. So the way we try and get around that is to get as far towards that right-hand end of the logic chain that we were seeing some examples of this morning as we can, getting towards the outcome. But we also want to make sure that what we're measuring is relevant. And we do a mix, actually, of measuring what we're doing, but also the national picture. So on something like greenhouse gas emissions, one of my jobs is to measure our greenhouse gas emissions as the Wildlife Trusts. But also we look at what's happening nationally with greenhouse gas emissions, carbon removals, those sorts of things, and we compare. And that's a very important part of understanding, are we actually doing anything beneficial for wildlife? And I think when I joined the organisation in 2021, I sat there thinking, if I was put up, I've 20 years in government before joining the Wildlife Trust, if I'd been put in front of a parliamentary committee and they had said, what impact are you having for wildlife? I would have found it quite difficult to answer that question. This starts to give us a bit of a picture that we can talk about that has trends in it that allows us to talk about what impact we're having in relation to the strategy. However, what we've been asked to talk about is the evidence emergency project. And this really was something that came about through a group of local wildlife trusts that led this. They are all conservation evidence champions. So Kent, we heard about this morning, the Sheffield and Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust as well, with central support from us. And this was really about how do we crack the conservation evidence issue within the Wildlife Trust? What really is the problem we're having here? And how can we come together and share that experience across all of the different trusts to try and deal with it? And it's actually had two phases. We're now in a second phase, but this phase was completed in 2022. And one of the things it did was actually to ask ourselves internally the question, what is the problem here? So this is just some survey results of all of the different trusts. So you'll be pleased to see that most trusts think evidence is important, but it's always good to ask that question just to make sure. But actually, when you go into the question of how effective do we think we are internally, obviously we get this shift starting to go to, well, you know, we're not bad, but actually there's a lot of room for improvement. So very few people said we were excellent, and a lot of our staff and volunteers thought we were fair. And I should just say with these as well, we're very much operating between the social sciences and the natural sciences at the Wildlife Trust. We do huge amounts of people-led, community-led engagement, community learning. So the green bars are the engagement and learning bits. The blue bar is land management and the yellow bar is ecological evidence. And actually you do see a bit of a difference between those different functions in the Wildlife Trust as well. And finally, is our conservation work evidence-led? This won't surprise any of you, but you know, again, a lot of people thought, yes, it's not bad, but actually a lot were undecided. So the fact we're not even sure suggests that there was definitely a problem there that needed addressing. And really, this is the barriers that we came up with. And again, we've touched on a lot of these this morning. This is where I'm going to be mildly controversial. But a lot of this is about, we don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of time. We have very stretched staff. We're a small set of charities. We're huge collectively, but each charity within itself is quite little. There's a lack of staff development time. We have insufficient staff capacity. There's some stuff around how we work together that we can look at as well. Lack of access to the literature, we've heard a lot about that. So we don't have any access to any peer-reviewed journals either, unless they're open access. The only person in the organisation at the moment that does is me, because I have a fellowship with the university and they've given me library privileges. So I'm the only person in a team of about 100 who can go and look for papers. My comment about this, and Rupert, who was at the back, said this morning as well, is the peer-reviewed literature really the future? Should we be scrapping the peer-reviewed literature in favour of something else for practitioners? You know, there are questions there about what is the best way of gathering this evidence. And I did a little test this morning. One of our research questions at the moment, similar to what Harriet was talking about, is how do we create and maintain effective temperate rainforests in the west of the UK? I had a go at seeing if the peer-reviewed literature could tell me the answer to that this morning, and of course it couldn't. It probably could tell me the answers to lots of specific questions within that wider question about what we're doing. But because we're working with these systems, it is quite hard for us to get into that with the peer-reviewed literature. And finally, very quickly, we do have a second phase of the Evidence Emergency Project going on at the minute. This has actually been lottery funded, which is excellent. So the Heritage Lottery Innovation Fund has given the trust a bit of money to do this. And we're getting into those barriers. So staff capacity, skills and training. We've got some micro grants that are going out to trusts to see if they can improve some of that. So it is carrying on. And actually the fact that we're finding centralised sources of funding for this is really good. And final slide, this is a bit small, but this is the support we want. So this is another thing that we ask the trusts about. And just one final comment, coming from a predominantly climate change background, one of the things that's worked really effectively in the climate change sector is having what I would call bridging organisations that bridge between the academic, scientific community and the practitioner community, and they give that advice. Harriet was also mentioning the idea, you know, we need to go and ask them because we need advice services. I haven't seen a lot of that in the conservation sector. Maybe that's something that we could look to in the future. That's it. Thank you.
Both this clear up. We do definitely have time for questions. If anybody has any questions?
Can you go back to that last slide about what support you would need? Because part of what we're doing here today is trying to figure out where are the gaps and what we should do collectively. And while they're putting it up, any reflections, there were some dazzling tools showcased earlier, artificial intelligence maps there. Do those seem relevant at all, or is that a step further away?
Yeah, I mean, Craig, you may want to come in here as well, but we're doing some really fascinating stuff. So we have a head of digital transformation, and we're pleased to hear. And she does a whole load of work about changing the culture of the Wildlife Trust towards more digital space and how we can use things like AI. We're doing a lot with remote sensing, eDNA, all these things, and the trusts are all doing this, but they're quite specific and probably more small scale projects because they're all trust led at the moment, but we're definitely shifting in that direction. Yeah.
I think because of our structure, because of, our huge number of sites, I think it's some of the more exciting opportunities, remote sensing, what we got from Glenn earlier, things like that. Those are really exciting for us. And then how you combine that with AI, plus to, I have this vision of one day, understanding what's going on across wildlife trusts in some kind of Tom Cruise Minority Report kind of way, being able to see it all. And that would be really exciting, because at the moment, a lot of the data we do have, a lot of it hasn't even been digitized, so it's still in old drawers and things like that. So the potential could be huge, and it particularly works with decentralized organizations. I do want something else Catherine said that was really important. I mean, a lot of the emphasis today has been about using evidence that's in peer-reviewed journals, and we completely understand, how important it is. But there is a massive body of evidence out there amongst, some of the best experts in this country on particular aspects of wildlife, are people that are not in academia, not even in professional conservation organizations, but pure kind of volunteers and stuff. And we really know that there can be problems with that as well, but there can be problems with academia. And just having a really good conversation and thinking about how we can tap into the extraordinary evidence and data that is out there, and an experience that's there in thousands and thousands of conservation volunteers across the country is worth a thought. And how is that worth, how do you sort that as good evidence and put that into the mix?
I was going to ask, I'm going to take chair's privilege, and so I'm going to ask a question related to that, which is, given that there is all that information out there, what do you think are the drivers or levers that we can pull to actually enable us to utilise that evidence that isn't in the peer review literature?
I mean, can I just give an
Postcard.
example? So I mentioned rainforest. So we've got a big temperate rainforest program. So do lots of other organisations. Government is interested as well. The shared collaborative learning space is a really key one. And for that sort of issue where we're all trying to do something similar, there's a myriad of research questions around how you establish, maintain, in the face of climate change, maintain temperate rainforests in the UK. And those sharing spaces with other NGOs, with research organisations, and actually shared research programmes. So we've been working with DEFRA, the Department for the Environment in the UK, to help create their own research programme on this. So we're all sharing that knowledge. So, and I was really pleased we had something on Indigenous knowledge this morning as well, because I think, I don't know if any of you were at the Nature-Based Solutions Conference last week at the other place, and much more about that. So there wasn't a huge amount of science in it, actually. A lot of it was about collaborative shared learning, Indigenous knowledge. Where do you find the evidence in the different places you can find it? I think that's come up quite a lot today. So
I think what I'd add is in all this, we really shouldn't underestimate the importance of citizen science and gathering evidence actually as an engagement motivation to the army of people we need to deliver conservation objectives. And we have to think how that plays off. And the kind of thing I'm excited about is say if hopefully at some point soon we might get permission to allow wild releases of beavers in this country. You could imagine trying to empower loads of citizens to be doing eDNA sampling across the country to monitor how beavers are spreading. Now, you probably get a better scientific answer by just a small group of different catchments. But actually, if you are supporting thousands of people to do eDNA sampling to monitor how beavers spread across the country, actually you're building then a huge army of people pro-beaver and really want to see beavers everywhere, and people have a stake in shaping that. And I think, just how you empower citizens and make them feel part of the same journey we're all on is a really important part of this discussion.
Yes. Yes, yeah.
Hi, thanks. Great presentations. I think your question about how do I restore rainforests and temperate rainforests on the west coast of England. It's a really interesting one because it sort of speaks to the difference in scale that questions come in at, that you then say, well, what's the right way of breaking that down into a way that can make it evidence-based? So to choose a fantasy scenario, we have a different government in a couple of weeks' time in the UK and the Secretary of State says, well, how do I meet my legally binding 2030 target for nature? What's the evidence base that tells her or him how to do that? Because that's the kind of question we should be expecting. And if we haven't planned for that, we've kind of, we've missed a trick, haven't we? So that there is something about how we understand collectively in this room the level of question that is right, that can then be aggregated up to say an evidence-based answer to this big strategic question is this. And I'm not sure we're always very good at doing that.
Completely agree, Pete. Completely agree. Sometimes we get so lost in the detail collectively that we don't end up, we struggle to produce a headline and then we end up irrelevant in policy discussions as a result of it. So I agree. So, I mean, we're still debating how to count 30 by 30. And in 2 weeks' time, there will be a new Secretary of State will ask that. So, sometimes it's better, I think sometimes it's better to give an answer and say, and almost have error bars on it than it is to give no answer at all.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I agree with Pete as well, but a lot of the speakers today have shown frameworks, decision-making frameworks, and I think that's almost where we need the advice. What's the best decision-making framework for this particular problem we have, or that particular problem? And you're right, it varies by scale enormously.
Okay, so we'll move on. Sorry.